The paper coffee cup steamed gently in Morgan Freeman's hand as he walked the quiet streets of Rosewood Hollow. The air was damp with the smell of earth and old rain. The sidewalk under his feet cracked and patched like a worn memory. He moved slowly, not from weakness, but from something deeper, a quiet savoring of the place that had built him, scarred him, and, in some strange way, still called him home. The town hadn't changed much. Same leaning telephone poles. Same stubborn oak trees clawing at the power lines. Same brick library with its flaking white paint, where as a boy he wasn't allowed past the third shelf. Freeman tugged his old baseball cap lower against the rising sun, his fingers brushing the frayed bill like it was a talisman. No one recognized him here. Not yet. And he liked it that way. Fame was a noise he didn't need today. On a porch across the street, a woman in a floral housecoat squinted at him. Her hand hovered near her chest for a long, uncertain moment before slipping into the folds of her robe. Freeman didn't see her pull out her phone. He didn't hear the panic tightening her voice as she whispered into the receiver. "There's a suspicious black man," she said, peering at Freeman like he was a shadow, not a man. "He's just walking around, near my house. Looks dangerous." Freeman kept strolling, coffee in hand, oblivious to the fear winding its way through the sleepy town. 3 blocks away, the dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio of a patrol car. Possible 10 to 66. Suspicious individual near 4th and Main. Proceed with caution. The cruiser, a battered white Ford with black smudges on the hood, lurched into motion. Inside, 2 young officers exchanged a glance, the kind that didn't need words. One tightened his jaw. The other flicked off the safety on his holster with a nervous click. Freeman rounded the corner by the church where his mother used to sing in the choir. He paused, feeling a tug in his chest, a ghost of him's long swallowed by time. He took a slow sip of his coffee. The paper cup trembled slightly in his hand, not from fear, but from the weight of remembering. The cruiser's tires screeched as it swung into view, kicking up dust. Morgan barely had time to set his cup down on the low stone wall by the sidewalk before voices tore through the morning air. "Get on the ground. Now." The words cracked like a whip. Freeman turned, confusion knitting his brow. His hands rose automatically, empty palms toward the sky. The young officers were already out, moving fast, hands trembling on their weapons. To them, he wasn't Morgan Freeman. He wasn't anybody. He was a silhouette, a threat. On the ground, one barked again, louder this time. Freeman's old knees bent carefully. The ground met him cold and unforgiving. Gravel bit into his palms. The air smelled of dust and fear. Heavy hands shoved him down, pinning his chest to the earth. His cap rolled into the gutter. His coffee spilled in a slow, sad arc across the cracked concrete, steam rising from the ruined drink. Footsteps thundered behind the rookies. Another car. Another officer. The senior cop froze mid-stride when he saw the man crumpled on the pavement. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "Christ, get off him," he barked, voice sharp and cracking. The rookies blinked, stunned. One of them, still pressing a knee into Freeman's back, looked up, confused. The senior officer's face had gone pale, his hands raised in frantic urgency. "Get off him. Now." But the rookies hesitated, the weight of their assumptions anchoring them to the scene. And Morgan Freeman, face turned sideways against the pavement, his cheek scraping against gravel, closed his eyes for a moment, not in fear, not even in anger, but in a deep, tired sadness. The rookies didn't move fast enough. The senior officer's voice tore through the static stillness again, louder, furious. "I said get off him." Finally, hands scrambled, boots shifted, and Morgan Freeman was freed from the crushing weight. He lay still for a beat longer than necessary, feeling the ache seep into his joints, letting the humiliation settle into his bones. Then, slowly, he pushed himself up, palms scraping against the gravel as he rose to a sitting position. Around him, the street had grown strange and hollow. A few curtains twitched in nearby windows. A dog barked once, uncertainly. Somewhere, a child's tricycle wheel spun in the breeze, the faint clatter breaking the heavy silence. One of the rookies muttered an apology under his breath, but Freeman didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on the spilled coffee soaking into the dust, the small, sad offering of a morning gone wrong. "Sir, are you hurt?" the senior officer asked, kneeling beside him, voice low, almost trembling. Morgan turned his head slightly, enough to meet the officer's gaze. His eyes, the same eyes that had watched history crumble and rebuild itself a dozen times over, were steady and full of a sadness too deep for outrage. "No," Freeman said quietly, his voice worn but unbroken. "No, I'm not hurt. Not in the way they meant." The rookies stood awkwardly nearby, shifting their weight, their adrenaline bleeding into shame. One of them opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. His hand fluttered uselessly by his side, searching for something to hold onto, a procedure manual, a handbook, a guide on what to do when you realize you just brutalized history. A siren wailed faintly in the distance, then cut off. Freeman wiped his dusty hands on his jeans and reached for his cap, brushing it clean with slow, methodical strokes. He placed it back on his head, the motion precise, ceremonial, like a soldier donning his armor. The senior officer rose slowly, running a hand down his face, the horror of recognition still etched deep into his features. "You two," he said to the rookies, voice tight with controlled fury, "you just arrested the man who played God." The rookies stared, blank, not quite understanding. The words sounded surreal here, among the broken sidewalks and sagging porches. "That's Morgan Freeman," the senior officer hissed, stepping closer, his voice low but fierce. Morgan Freeman. Recognition hit like a delayed explosion. One rookie's mouth dropped open, the other went rigid, his eyes darting frantically between Freeman and the senior officer, as if searching for some alternate reality where this wasn't happening. The weight of their mistake pressed down heavier than any badge could carry. Freeman adjusted his cap, his hands steady. His gaze swept the street, the sagging porch where the woman still stood, phone clutched in both hands, guilt etched into her lined face. The neighbors peeking out from behind curtains, already deciding whether they would tell this story later as a cautionary tale or a tragedy. He sighed, deep and bone-tired, and started to stand. His knees protested, but he refused the offered hand of the senior officer. Some things you had to do on your own. The rookies took an unconscious step back. Morgan brushed the dirt from his jacket with slow, deliberate motions. He said nothing more. He didn't have to. The truth already filled the air, heavy as a summer storm. The senior officer opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg forgiveness on behalf of a town still clutching its old ghosts, but Freeman raised a hand, stopping him. His voice, when it came, was soft, too soft to be casual. "Why do you see me as a threat?" Silence clamped down on the street like a vice. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. One rookie, the younger one, barely older than a boy himself, snapped back, his voice raw and stupidly honest. "You know why." The words hung there, naked, undeniable. Freeman looked at him, and for a moment, there was no actor standing on a street corner, no legend crumpled in the dirt. Just a man who had seen the world change on television screens and thought, maybe it had changed in the streets too. He was wrong. Morgan Freeman stood still, the early morning light casting a long shadow behind him. Gravel dust clung to his jeans, a smear of coffee stained the curb, and somewhere far away a crow cawed, a sharp, jarring sound in the heavy quiet. The rookie's words, "You know why," were still unraveling in the space between them, thin and poisonous. No one rushed to take them back. No one could. Morgan didn't move, didn't flinch. He just looked at the boy, because he was a boy, really, and in his gaze was no fury, no retaliation, only a vast, aching sadness that made the rookie look down at his boots as if the asphalt could swallow him whole. The senior officer took a step closer, clearing his throat awkwardly, but Freeman didn't acknowledge him. His eyes remained fixed on the rookie. "You know why?" Morgan repeated softly, not as a question now, but as a statement, a bitter echo of a lifetime. A car door creaked open somewhere behind them. More neighbors emerging. More cameras raised by trembling hands. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. It was an unmasking. The rookie shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. His partner, cheeks flushed red, tugged at his utility belt like it might anchor him to something solid. Morgan tilted his head slightly, not in mockery, not in anger, but in a way that invited the boy to see. To truly see him. Not the old man in dusty jeans. Not the movie star. Just the man. The man who had walked these streets when sidewalks ended at signs that said whites only. The man who had learned, too young, that respect wasn't freely given. It had to be torn from clenched fists and hardened hearts. The senior officer finally spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "Mr. Freeman, I am." He swallowed hard. "I am so sorry. We didn't recognize you." Morgan's eyes finally flicked to him, sharp and clear. "Would it have mattered?" he asked, his voice a deep, slow river cutting through stone. The officer opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no answer that wouldn't reveal something ugly. Freeman shook his head once, a small, weary motion. He reached down, picked up the empty coffee cup, and dusted it off without thinking. His fingers were steady. His dignity was unshaken. The woman on the porch was crying now, fat tears slipping down her cheeks. Freeman didn't look at her. He didn't need to. He knew her fear had never been about him. It was older than both of them. It had been carved into the bones of this town before either of them was born. Behind him, more cruisers had arrived. More uniforms spilling out. Too late to stop it. Too late to undo what had already been laid bare. Freeman turned slightly, facing the small crowd that had gathered, ordinary people clutching their coffee cups and grocery bags in silent shame. He looked at them all, eyes sweeping across faces frozen between horror and habit. "You see the color before you see the man," he said, not raising his voice. Not needing to. Someone in the crowd murmured something, a protest maybe, or a prayer, but Freeman didn't wait to hear it. He adjusted his cap, brushed the dust from his sleeves, and turned away, moving slow and deliberate, every inch the monument they had tried to pull down. As he walked, the town seemed to shrink back, the weight of its smallness exposed under the rising sun. No one followed him. No one dared. And Freeman kept walking, leaving behind a silence louder than any siren, a silence filled only by the one question they would not be able to escape. "Why do you see me as a threat?" The town square, once so familiar to Morgan Freeman, now felt like a stage set for a play he hadn't agreed to perform in. Behind him, the small crowd remained rooted in place, caught between wanting to disappear and wanting to apologize, though none dared speak. The police radios crackled nervously, but no one answered them. Freeman kept walking. Slow. Measured. His feet moving over the old sidewalk like he was tracing the scars of a place that had never truly healed. The senior officer, still by the cruiser, took off his cap and wiped his forehead with a trembling hand. He turned to the rookies, two young men who looked like they had aged a decade in the past 5 minutes. "You two," he rasped, voice low but deadly, "you listen to me." Neither dared move. "You didn't just make a mistake," the senior officer said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You showed this town who we still are." The rookies shifted uneasily, their hands hovering near their belts, not from fear but from a deep, clenching shame that had no holster to hide in. "He's a legend," one whispered hoarsely. The senior officer let out a humorless laugh, bitter and broken. "He's a man. That should have been enough." The younger rookie looked like he wanted to vomit. The older one, the one who had barked, "You know why," stared at his boots, cheeks burning. No training academy had prepared them for this. Across the street, a woman clutched her child tighter, instinctively turning him away from the scene. A man lowered his phone, shame flickering across his face. A teenager looked down at the screen, replaying what he had captured, not with pride, but with a sick pit in his stomach. Inside the police cruiser, the dispatcher's voice buzzed again. "Unit 12, confirm status on 4th and Main?" No one reached for the mic. Instead, the senior officer finally moved, walking back to his vehicle like a man wading through wet cement. He opened the door, sat heavily in the driver's seat, and stared straight ahead, seeing nothing but the question Morgan Freeman had left behind. Why? The word gnawed at him. Not how, not what went wrong, but why, the oldest and most dangerous question. And there was no training, no badge, no apology big enough to answer it. Meanwhile, Morgan Freeman rounded the corner, out of sight. His back straight, his heart heavy. He knew what would come next. The news vans. The apologies. The frantic, desperate attempts to patch the hole with statements and tweets and promises to do better. He had seen it before. He had lived it before. And he knew this truth. You can clean the bloodstain. You can rebuild the broken windows. But you can't unmake a town's reflection once it's been shown to itself. The reflection was already spreading. Neighbor to neighbor. Household to household. Phone to phone. And soon, beyond the borders of Rosewood Hollow, the world would see it too. But Morgan Freeman didn't care about the headlines or the hashtags that would follow. He cared about the boy in the uniform, standing by the cruiser, staring at the ground like he wanted it to open and swallow him whole. Because if there was hope, it wasn't in the apologies. It was in the regret. And regret, real, raw regret, could be a beginning, if they let it. Morgan tugged the brim of his cap lower, shielding his face from the rising sun. He didn't need the world to know who he was. He needed the world to remember who they were supposed to be. The first video hit the internet by noon. A shaky clip from a cracked iPhone, uploaded by a teenager too stunned to even add a caption. 30 seconds of raw footage, a frail old man, face pressed against the ground, two young officers gripping his arms, a paper coffee cup rolling into the gutter. At first, it was just a few clicks, a few shares. By evening, it was everywhere. Not because it was another police incident. There were sadly too many of those, but because someone recognized him. That's Morgan Freeman. Someone gasped, voice breaking into the background noise of the video. Morgan Freeman, the man who played presidents and prisoners and gods. Morgan Freeman, whose voice had narrated hope into the hearts of millions. Morgan Freeman, pressed into the dirt like he was nobody at all. Headlines boiled over. Legendary actor mistaken for threat in hometown. Freeman incident sparks national outcry. Fame didn't protect him. Why? News trucks lined up outside the police station. Journalists prowled the streets of Rosewood Hollow, shoving microphones under the noses of residents too stunned to speak. The police department released a statement within hours, cold, clipped, and careful. Words like unfortunate misunderstanding and deep regret were stitched together into a sterile apology no one believed. The two rookie officers were suspended pending investigation. The senior officer, the one who had pulled them off Freeman, was put on mandatory leave for a failure to supervise. But Morgan Freeman didn't make a statement. Not yet. He watched the storm from a small motel room on the edge of town, a black and white TV flickering in the corner, the news anchor's voice buzzing like a tired insect. He sipped weak motel coffee from a styrofoam cup and listened to the world turn his quiet morning into a symbol, a movement, a rallying cry. They wanted him to be angry. They wanted him to cry. They wanted him to demand justice on live television. But Morgan Freeman knew something deeper. Rage could be dismissed. Tears could be pitted. Only a question could endure. The motel clerk, a young woman with chipped nail polish and wary eyes, knocked timidly on his door. "Mr. Freeman," she said, her voice tight with nerves. "You have, visitors." Morgan raised an eyebrow. She stepped aside, revealing a small group, a local pastor, a teacher, an old friend from childhood who hadn't dared speak to him when the sirens blared earlier that morning. They came in awkwardly, holding their hats in their hands, shame curling around their feet like smoke. "We're sorry," the pastor said, voice rough, "for what they did to you, for what we didn't stop." Freeman set his coffee down carefully. He looked at them, really looked at them, saw the fear, the guilt, the slow dawning realization that they had all been complicit, somehow, in the silence that let it happen. "I appreciate that," he said quietly. "But this isn't about me." The old friend frowned, confused. "Then what's it about?" Morgan leaned back in the rickety motel chair, his eyes never leaving theirs. "It's about asking yourselves why it took a famous man to make you care. The words landed heavy, like stones thrown into still water. No one spoke. No one dared. And Morgan Freeman, worn and weathered and still standing, knew that now. Now they were listening. The video was simple. No flashing headlines. No dramatic music. No scrolling ticker tape of outrage. Just Morgan Freeman, sitting in a straight-back chair against a plain gray wall, the lighting soft, almost reverent. His old baseball cap sat on the small table beside him. His hands were folded loosely in his lap. He looked straight into the camera. And he waited. The silence stretched long enough to make people lean closer to their screens, wondering if something had gone wrong. Only then did Freeman speak. "I was mistaken for a threat today," he said, voice steady, rich, unhurried. "Not because I was doing anything wrong. Not because I was breaking the law. But because someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong." He let the words hang there, heavy and unpolished. "Some of you are outraged because you recognize my face, my voice, my work. You see a man you admire, and so you feel anger." He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees. "But what if I hadn't been Morgan Freeman?" A pause. Deeper now. The kind of pause that reaches into your chest and forces you to sit with yourself. What if I had been just another black man walking down the street? The camera stayed tight on his face, no edits, no cuts. Just truth, raw and unvarnished. Would you have cared then? Another silence. Deeper still. Does someone have to be famous to deserve respect? His voice softened even more, not weakening, but becoming something you had to lean into to hear. Or is dignity only something we award once we've decided someone's earned it? He sat back then, the question floating into the space between him and the world like a slow, inevitable tide. "Think about that," Freeman said, almost a whisper now. "Please, think about it." Then he reached over, picked up his old cap, placed it gently on his head, and looked one last time into the camera. Not angry, not pleading, just waiting. The screen faded to black. No logos, no hashtags, no calls for donations. Just the silence he left behind, louder than any rallying cry. And out in the world, from Rosewood Hollow to the farthest corners of the internet, that silence grew into something else, a mirror. For once, there was no one else to blame. No convenient villain to point at. Only the reflection staring back at them. The silence Freeman left behind didn't stay silent for long. By morning, his video had been viewed over 50 million times. It wasn't just trending. It was sinking in. No screaming pundits. No trending hashtags burning out in 24 hours. Just that one question replaying in the minds of millions. Does someone have to be famous to deserve respect? News anchors stumbled over their scripts, unsure how to frame a story with no villain to condemn, no easy scapegoat to exile. Celebrities shared his words. Politicians awkwardly tried to wrap statements around them. But the question resisted ownership. It slipped through talking points like water through clenched fists. In Rosewood Hollow, the streets changed too, but not with parades or protests. It was quieter than that. Harder than that. Neighbors crossed the street to look each other in the eye. Store clerks found themselves hesitating before making assumptions. Teachers rewrote their lesson plans. Pastors rewrote their sermons. An old mural downtown, a faded, forgotten painting of the town's founders, was quietly washed clean overnight. By morning, a new image had started to take shape. It wasn't of Morgan Freeman. He would have hated that. It was of a silhouette, faceless, timeless, walking alone down a cracked sidewalk, holding nothing but a paper coffee cup. Underneath, in careful, simple letters, someone had painted the words, "See the man before you see the color." No one claimed credit. No one needed to. At the police department, changes came slower. The rookies resigned before the investigation finished. The senior officer filed for early retirement, his shoulders bowed under a guilt he couldn't shake. But the real change was smaller, almost invisible. Recruitment posters came down. New training manuals appeared, thinner, sharper, harder to ignore. The chief, an old man who once prided himself on knowing everyone by name, sat alone in his office late into the night, staring at Freeman's face on the TV and wondering how many others he had never really seen. Children in Rosewood Hollow grew up hearing about that morning, about the day the whole town froze in place because it realized it was still living in the past. They didn't tell the story with anger. They told it as a warning. See the man, they would whisper to each other in schoolyards and on basketball courts when someone got too loud, too proud. See the man. And somewhere far away, Morgan Freeman lived quietly, walking the streets of other towns, sipping coffee, blending into sunrises, leaving behind not a legacy of fame, but a legacy of reflection. Because he understood something the world was only beginning to grasp. Change doesn't roar. It echoes. The sun was setting when Morgan Freeman returned to the old house on Willow Lane. The front porch sagged a little more than he remembered. The paint had peeled back to bare wood in long, curling strips. Grass pushed stubbornly through the cracked walkway, wild and untamed. Morgan stood at the gate for a long moment, one hand resting lightly on the rusted latch. He could hear the whisper of the oak trees overhead, the distant laughter of children playing somewhere far down the street. Life undisturbed. Life moving forward. The air smelled of honeysuckle and memory. Slowly, he pushed the gate open. It groaned in protest, but gave way. He walked the old path, each step stirring up tiny clouds of dust, and reached the porch. His fingers brushed over the wooden railing, worn smooth by years of summers and storms. He could almost hear his mother's voice, calling him in from the dusk. Could almost see his younger self, sprinting barefoot up these steps. He sat down on the top stair, his knees creaking in protest. The evening light slanted low, painting the town in gold and amber. Freeman removed his cap, placed it beside him, and let the breeze run its fingers through his silver hair. No cameras, no crowd, no noise. Just the sound of a town breathing, slower now, perhaps wiser too. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket and flipped it open. No speech prepared, no manifesto, just a scrap of a thought he had jotted down days ago, long before the sirens, long before the world had come crashing through the quiet morning. He read it aloud, to no one in particular. Fame is a bright mirror. It shows you what people want to see. Respect is a dark mirror. It shows you what they are when no one is looking. Freeman closed the notebook carefully and tucked it back into his jacket. He sat there for a while longer, watching the shadows stretch across the sidewalk where his story had once begun, long before the lights, the cameras, the awards. A few cars passed by, the drivers glancing at him, hesitating, maybe recognizing the face, maybe not. It didn't matter. Morgan smiled, a small, private thing, and stood slowly, his bones protesting less this time. He picked up his cap, dusted it off with a gentle hand, and placed it back on his head. Then he walked down the steps, back into the fading light. Not as Morgan Freeman the actor, not as the man who voiced presidents and gods, just as a man who had asked a question, a man who knew the answer would echo long after he was gone. And as he disappeared into the soft embrace of twilight, the town behind him stood just a little taller, a little quieter, a little more awake.